everybody, and welcome back to the Paddocks. In this episode, we are going to be talking all about the Japan Grand Prix and everything that kind of went down that weekend. On this episode, we have Ito, Mel, Chelsea, and myself, Hannah. And let's go ahead and jump right in with some updates from Melissa.
All right. So for the 2024 season, the Japanese Grand Prix is being held earlier in the year rather than towards the end of the season, like it had been in the past. Why, you may wonder? Well, it was essentially changed to it's just part of like the F1's like whole region like little change up to make everything kind of closer in region and everything, but also to avoid typhoon season because usually the rainy season into like typhoon season starts like our summertime into like the end of the year, and it's not a fun time as we've seen in past races in general for that track and for the country. So hopefully we'll see it earlier in the year. Kind of does mess up my sleep schedule. I don't know about the girls. And now for some pre-race fun heading into the weekend. Leading up to race weekend, we heard the news that Alex's chassis has been repaired in time for the Japanese Grand Prix. However, Logan will be driving the car with the repaired chassis. I don't know about y'all, but I'm not liking these decisions being made over at Williams. I get it to a point, but not really happy, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Honestly, it just screams favoritism to me. That's it. Like, complete favoritism.
Remember how last year in Qatar, when James Vowles told Logan, let's take care of you after he felt sick in the car? I definitely feel like this wasn't a decision that guy made, but rather the Valtteri, it's James version of you at Mercedes. And honestly, while I do get why people are mad, I am too, to an extent, because he didn't do anything wrong, him being Logan. I also get it from a team perspective because in the constructor standings, every point matters because it indicates where you finish, and whether you finish P7 or P6 or P8, it's millions of dollars. So them putting Alex in the car and giving him the newer chassis or the non-fixed chassis, it gives him more opportunities to score points because he's usually the point scorer. Is it fair at the end of the day? No, because he crashed a car. It's his fault. But at the same time, I get it from a money perspective.
I agree with Mel. I'm not too excited to see the decisions that like Williams has been making, especially in regards to like the car chassis with Logan and Alex. I understand last race weekend, right? Because Alex is like the number one driver. It is what it is. And not last race weekend, but you guys know what I mean. Anyways, it just like we didn't even see Alex get points. No shade to Alex. But all that, and we still didn't see Alex get points. So the decision to do that was like mute. There was no point. This weekend, I again didn't understand the decision. Alex crashed his car. His car got fixed. And it only makes sense to give the car back to the person who crashed it. Williams gave it back to Logan instead. They didn't give it to Alex, which tells me in like a roundabout way that either they didn't fix the car to the fullest extent, and that's why they're not giving it back to their number one driver, or they just don't believe in how they fixed it and they're not giving it back to their number one driver. Because why aren't you giving it back to the person that it belongs to? And then why are you passing it on to Logan and having still high expectations for him? You know, it's just, I get it. Whatever, Alex is like their main focus when it comes to what they believe is their chance in getting points, but it isn't a great look in just how they're treating the drivers, because I feel like off the bat, it kind of puts Logan and Alex in a weird situation because that's not really in their hands.
I mean, we could talk about the Williams, Logan, and Alex situation for hours, and honestly, we have in the group chat. But let's move on to some special helmets because there were a few. such as Fernando's Samurai one, because of him being called the Spanish Samurai. And then, of course, Yuki's home GP helmet. But I do want to highlight one that's very close to my heart, which is Charles's tribute helmet to Jules Bianchi, who 10 years ago was involved in a crash at the Japanese GP that would ultimately cost him his life.
I'm kind of bummed more drivers didn't wear like cool helmets or get as creative as they have in the past, because I feel like they kind of use like their usual like helmets like early in the season and then get really creative like towards the end. So I'm kind of like, I don't even want to say kind of, I'm actually like super bummed because I look forward to like the cool helmets. But just to echo Ito's, I love Charles's helmet. It's just a really sweet touch, and especially coming from him in the relationship, like loved it. However, at the rest of the drivers, I have some ideas for next year's Japanese Grand Prix. So hit me up because I have a lot, especially for someone whose last name is close to a Pokemon's name. Pierre, I'm looking at you. I have a really cool idea. So yeah, we need to get creative. That's all.
I do love seeing how creative some of the drivers can get with their helmets. I do think it's a little lackluster right now, and they could do better. But I think my favorite ones are the ones that they make with like sentiment behind it, not just fun designs, because it's kind of cool seeing how they dedicate those races and those kind of like Grand Prix to the person too, which I know we'll talk about later, but it's really nice that Charles dedicated his race. You know, he does it almost every year, but it's nice that he dedicated it again.
No, I do agree. I love Charles' tribute helmet to Jules, and I do love that the drivers do that. We have seen more and more of that over the last 2 years, and it's honestly great. But one that hasn't been mentioned was Lando's helmet design for this Grand Prix. And it was probably one of my favorites that I've seen so far. The pink helmet with the Tokyo drift style, it just hit so great, and it was just honestly amazing. And they never cease to amaze me sometimes with these designs of helmets and how often they do it.
And also, side note, I want to shout out to whoever made that beautiful cherry blossom tree with messages to Yuki from his fans at the RB paddock. If you haven't checked it out, literally just look up Yuki and cherry blossom tree, and it's like the most wholesome thing ever. It's such a sweet touch, and I want to see who's ready to sign a petition for this race to be held during the cherry blossom season, because in an interview, Yuki even said that he never sees the cherry blossoms because of the race schedule. So, like, we need to keep it at this time of year because cherry blossoms are beautiful to see, and I can just imagine what he's missing out on during this time, especially it's his home race. So, like, why not?
I mean, cherry blossoms are what Japan is known for, so I totally agree. But let's talk about the race and free practice and stuff. So, for FP1, Logan, sad to say, but he ended up in the wall, meaning he wasn't able to take part in FP2 as the damage to the car was bad enough that it couldn't be repaired between the two sessions, which is usually like a 2-hour period. And fun fact, actually, RB did their first of 2 mandatory rookie sessions by putting Iwasa in Danny Rick's car, which meant that that team had 2 Japanese drivers on track for FP1.
Honestly, Rip, I always wish the best for Logan as a Floridian, and I hope this season turns around for him. Right now, Williams won't have another chassis, I think, until Miami, most likely. That's what they're aiming for. Obviously, maybe now with Alex, they might be a little behind, but I think by Miami, we'll see a few more teams with the third chassis because actually, not all of them have a third chassis yet. I think Alpine might be missing theirs too. And there's also a few plans for more upgrades. Not huge ones from what I can find online, but everyone seems to have like small upgrade plans that they hope to have in like already in play by Miami. So I'm excited. I hope it's going to be a fun race.
This seems to be very on par for like last year with the updates as well. So I'm kind of interested to see if that closes the gap a little bit more between some of the drivers and teams, or if we start seeing some more predominant issues. We saw both last year. But honestly, going back to FP1, Danny not in FP1, I think it kind of was a mess just due to that weekend and how FP2 and everything played out with the weather. While I understand the call, I don't know if it was the right one.
Honestly, I must agree, Hannah, because as you mentioned, the weather in FP2. Because so for those of you who didn't watch, FP2 was rainy, and because the race wasn't forecast to be rainy, not a lot of teams actually decided to do a lot of running in that session because they were like, we don't need the data in wet weather. And also because it was like semi-raining, like it was raining, but it was not wet enough for the wet tire, but not dry enough for the inter tire. So it was like this in-between situation. So that just meant a lot of teams hardly got any running in. Like I think McLaren were like the first ones to send their people out, and they maybe did like 3-4 laps and then came back in and everything. And actually, fun fact, I read this just before we started recording. Because of this whole situation, Pirelli actually now wants to talk to the FIA again and the F1 teams because pre this season, they changed the wet tire specs. But now, because of this situation, Pirelli is like, we need to change something again. So we'll see what happens there.
That's really interesting to know because it sucks when the weather affects these practice sessions because I feel like it can just affect the quality and the race in so many ways. Like you're not getting the necessary data to see like where drivers are like struggling or like excelling and everything. It's just, yeah, it's a lot.
No, I completely agree. Those practice races, I think they can really make a difference. Maybe not for all the drivers if they've been to that circuit a lot of times, but for example, like Oscar probably would have benefited since to me he's still new and I know he did well. I think he had the fastest time for FP2, but like, a proper FP2 would have benefited all of them, especially Logan. I know he wasn't really able to do it, but I feel like this wasn't a great weekend for some of our homies.
No, Chelsea, I completely agree. I think it's hard for the teams to gauge the rest of the weekend, especially from like the tire degradation standpoint with the cars due to the lack of practice even for the drivers. But I will say it did open up more sets of tires to be used for like quali and race though, so that is a plus and we did see that come into play with the race.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, even FP3 was semi a mess. And ahead of FP3, actually, Aston Martin, for the first out of the 2 allowed times per season, broke curfew in order to upgrade Fernando Alonso's car, as Lance had already been running the upgrades for F1 and 2. And due to the favorable data in those sessions, it was decided to put the upgrades on Fernando's car right then and there.
I was pretty happy with the practice races this weekend, even with the whole FP2 thing, to be honest, though. Just because, okay, maybe this is like a personal opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. I feel like you're really seeing Ferrari get close to Red Bull this year. It's very lovely to witness. And I just think that Red Bull, I get it. They're still on top. They're still doing their thing. I just think that maybe by the end of the season, they might not be doing the thing. Maybe.
It has been nice to see the gap close this year with the teams versus Red Bull because we all saw the Red Bull domination over and over again last year. we've seen a major uptick with the teams like Ferrari, even McLaren and Mercedes are getting close, like third and fourth, and kind of going back and forth with who is kind of like that setting point, and being neck at neck at times, even with Red Bull. So that has been very good to see, and it makes for the races to be a lot more entertaining.
Agreed. Even though I must say, quali isn't where we see that change, in my opinion, just yet. It's more so race pace. So let's talk about what happened in quali first. So, Q1, we had exits from Lance, Pierre, Kevin, Logan, and Joe. And honestly, it was the first time that a Alpine made it out of Q1 this season. And honestly, I loved Esteban celebrating going through to Q2 as if it was pole. Like, he celebrated so much like it was a race win. It was so cute. Sadly, the celebration was short-lived though, as he was out in Q2 together with Danny, who got knocked out by his teammate, Hulkenberg, Bottas, and Albon. And then for Q3, dare I say, I wasn't that surprised with the final order being Verstappen, Perez, Norris, Sainz, Alonso, Piastri, Hamilton, Leclerc, Russell, and Tsunoda. The one that surprised me though was Charles, because he's such a good qualifier, yet he only managed P8. Could it be because they only sent him out once in order to save a set of tires for the race, or something else? Who knows, as not even he could explain what happened in the post-quali interview.
Yeah, I was very happy. I mean, like, very, very happy and proud to see Lando Norris strive and get P3. He's been very consistent this year, I will say, in quali, and even led into a very good race. But I will say I felt for Charles when he said this was all he could do over the radio, and that he couldn't seem to understand why the sudden loss of pace compared to Australia. So I'm hoping that they work on that and stay a little bit more consistent. But I did feel bad with Charles because he did not seem very happy over the radio. Um, the man deserves better.
Yeah, I feel like Carlos and Charles this weekend at least were just on different paces for quali, and we'll talk about the race later, but Carlos just had better pacing this time for the racing his car, and like Charles said, our like overtakes are hard on this track, so he just I think had a tougher luck with the car and the overtakes this weekend. It was kind of like a bam bam situation.
It appeared to me that a lot of drivers in general were struggling with finding that pace that the Red Bulls had. Because I remember like Lewis going on the radio just talking about how he doesn't know where to gain that like half second that he needed to like get closer to the Red Bulls. And then like Charles had mentioned, like he just couldn't get the pace himself. So I feel like a lot of people were just not on the fun bus this weekend as terms to pace. But we know the Red Bulls are rockets too. So it's kind of like, it's interesting because like after like the Red Bulls, everyone's so close within pace and their times, and also it's like it's kind of interesting to me. But yeah, I just feel like they were just struggling in general to find that speed that they needed.
And with there only being 4 sectors of DRS in this track, it does make it hard as there really isn't a lot of back and forth with the lineup. Like, you don't really see that consistent like overtakes, like Melissa said. So that is kind of interesting.
And now to the best part of our weekends, race time. So as per usual, Max gets a nice clean start, just taking off into the race and getting away, with Checo right behind, and Lando quite literally fighting for his life. But again, I gotta give him credit because it was just a bunch going on. I felt right at the start of the race, which we're gonna get to like in a second, but I felt like the Red Bulls were just like they just flew away and everyone else was like, ah. So it was at least interesting for that portion.
Well, the Red Bulls taking off into the sunset didn't last long because Danny and Alex made contact on that first lap, meaning a red flag.
We could even make it past the first damn turn without some drama. Like, literally, not even barely past it. But it looked like it was just a racing incident from all the replays that they've shown. But at the end of the day, always glad that both drivers got out of their car safely and were fine.
Yeah, I could have seen this backwards. I couldn't tell exactly with the cars, but someone, either Alex or Danny, clipped the other's front tire, and that led to one spinning out and the other one crashing into the wall. So, not not great.
No, definitely not great. It looked like Danny went wide to avoid Alonso, which then, like Chell said, caused Alex to clip Danny, or maybe vice versa, which was not something I think either of those drivers really needed this weekend. Um, I do think both of those teams are really, really upset.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, there are rumors flying about things like Danny losing his seat, and of course, we also now have another damaged chassis at Williams, meaning that they have no undamaged chassis until at least Miami, when they are rumored to bring in their third chassis. So it might be, with the timeline and everything, that they actually might only run one car in China in 2 weeks, depending on how customs works out, how shipping works out, how much damage is done, etc. Let's hope they have two cars, but who knows?
I don't know. At this point, they're going to have to, like, Le Mans style and, like, take turns every few laps and switch, or just get a two-seater car at this point and take, I don't know, something. Because I'm going to be kind of annoyed if Logan gets the crappy end of the stick and not drive again. But that's my opinion because, again, he's our American boy, can do no wrong. I know the people at the Williams HQ are stressed with all this damage to their cars. Like, all I picture is that SpongeBob meme with all the other little SpongeBobs running in the office on fire. And that cost cap, RIP.
So yeah, I honestly think you guys are right. Williams is very stressed. The team principal was responding to questions about like whether they're frustrated with like what's happening with the chassis and the car and Logan and Alex, and he said they weren't, in the words, frustrated. They were more so just like they have a very big time crunch, and honestly, like we keep saying, they're not. It feels like they're almost not prepared for how this season has been going. And I think it's taking a very big toll on the team and the drivers now.
Yeah, James Vels did not look happy or seem happy when they went to him after like the red flag so they could fix the barrier. You could tell he was very upset and almost stressed. I don't know, maybe just me that noticed it, but he definitely seemed like he was in his head and like trying to maybe calculate everything and like their next moves.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Williams this season, with how, dare I say, unprepared they are, it's giving circa 2018 when they showed up to testing late. But Williams wasn't the only one that had issues with that crash, because if you guys didn't notice, Joe almost went into the back of K-Mag during that turn one or lap one incident. And honestly, it was kind of, dare I say, good that it was red flagged, because it then allowed teams to change their tires if they so wanted without penalty under the red flag.
Yeah, so many teams either swapped it for softs for that launch of the line, or they opted to switch to mediums. But I will say the top four starting on the grid did not change tires, and they all stayed on their mediums or hards that they started the race with.
Yeah. And honestly, that restart was somewhat spicy too, because shortly after, we saw another Alpine civil war, maybe? Because apparently Gasly went into the side of Ocon, but thankfully both continued to race as normal. Thank God it wasn't a repeat of Australia last year.
Yeah, I saw that replay and it just looked like another simple racing incident. Again, what do I know? I'm not a driver. I'm not the FIA. But knowing the history between those two, it could be anything and it could be a lot. So we will never really know.
Honestly, at this point, the teams slash drivers just need to call a truce and be done with whatever is going on and just look forward as working together for the greater good for the team. I mean, I know it can be hard. Maybe they need to like go into like this screaming room and just scream at each other, get all their anger out, get all their frustration out, and then be like, okay, cool, let's move forward.
But while they figured that out, can we talk about how Sauber's first pit stop was only 4 seconds? Which is a huge improvement for them, and it still allowed Bottas to get ahead of Sonoda, who also came into pit.
At the end of the day, it all just takes a little practice.
Sadly, that good note was short-lived for Sauber because shortly after, Zhou came into the pits for seemingly front wing damage, but they ultimately decided to retire him while he was in the pits for gearbox issues.
Yeah, it was quite interesting because at first it appeared to be an issue with the front wing, as you could see them like making adjustments to it in on like camera in the pit, and then they DNF'd him, and it was just, or it appeared to see a little bit all over the place, and it wasn't very clear on what had actually happened. So you were kind of like left unknowing up in the air.
I swear, besides Charles, Zhou has the worst luck out of the whole grid. Like those two need an A cleanse or something at this point. I don't know at this point for the both of them. But I swear Zhou can never catch a damn break in that damn car. And it's really frustrating because I feel like we're missing out on seeing his full potential as an F1 driver. And he has this crappy car, if you ask me. And I'm just like, I just want to see you drive really fast and do really well. Like I'm always rooting for him. And then this always happens. And it sucks.
It does indeed. Let's just hope that at his first home race in 2 weeks in Shanghai, that bad luck doesn't follow. But the other person that Mel mentioned with the bad luck was definitely holding his own, especially while Charles was leading the race. But of course, Max in P2 then made that overtake look like a piece of cake, as usual.
Aside from the overtake, which we all knew it would eventually happen, did anyone notice that Charles was leading the race at lap 17 in particular? Like Jules was truly looking down on him today. And yeah, I just love that for Charles.
Yeah, I honestly agree. I love that for Charles. And I think Charles running this, or yeah, basically running this on a one-stop plan is just very impressive, to be honest, considering I feel like the average is 2. You don't really see a lot of people succeed with 1. I still think he did well. I know we're gonna talk about it. I still think he did well with 1. And considering his teammate, I'm pretty sure did 2 stops. Carlos did like a. We'll talk about it, but I don't know. I was very impressed with Charles. Considering his position, I was still very impressed with him.
Yeah, he was truly the tire whisperer during that race.
Yeah, and I do think he was upset when they finally pitted him, because it caused him to give up his place as lead or like in second place, and that man was doing really, really good.
Yeah. And what was funny though is when they pitted him, they also, McLaren decided to pit Lando. So they came into the pits together. And McLaren did that in an effort to cover off Russell. And sadly, that attempt failed as George overtook Lando at pit exit. And Lando was pissed. Like on that radio. Ugh. Another person, though, whose tires were hanging on for dear life at one point was Nico Hulkenberg when he was trying to get that point, that last 10th place point. Sadly, Sonoda didn't really care that Nico was trying his hardest and made the overtake look very smooth. And around the same time, we had Logan go off the road. And honestly, when I saw that happen, I was like, Williams, really? But thankfully, he was able to reverse back out of the gravel and get back on track, which kudos to him, honestly. Because reversing any car, especially an F1 car who's not supposed to be reversed, is rough. And honestly, also, can we talk about how, according to everyone, like all the pundits, all the like old drivers, current drivers, everyone, you're not supposed to be able to overtake in the S's at Suzuka, yet everyone did it and everyone made it look easy. How?
I'm just gonna say skill. That's how they make it look easy. Because I could not even attempt or wanting to try to do that by myself. But I will say, Logan just finishing the race was amazing to me because that man did deserve to finish. But I will say the middle slash back of the grid racing was just impeccable to see and watch. Very much a battle to the fittest, it kind of seemed like. You saw a lot of back and forth. Even the softs were being used to the test this race. um, you just really got to see a lot of action versus like the front of the grid a lot of times.
One such battle was the one between Oscar and George. And honestly, seeing that, it gave old school F1. Sadly, it didn't last that long, that battle, but dare I say, Senna and Prost would be proud.
I did not check because I completely forgot, but did the stewards ever say anything about the Oscar George thing or
I don't believe anything came of it, and it was promptly dismissed, from what it seems like, from the stewards. So, unfortunately, no.
it'd be like that?
The FIA doing FIA things. But that kind of brings us towards the end of the race. So we got some Yuki points, which is the first time actually a Japanese driver scores any points at his home race since Kobayashi in 2012. So 12 years ago. That's insane. Because we've had Japanese drivers for a fair bit in between.
I was so proud of him. He had his racing moment, he had overtakes, and it was really great to just like see him push for those home points that we know him and Japan really wanted.
Yes, Yuki really deserved it and made his team and home proud. I bet you he celebrated after that win. I know I would.
If I were Yuki, I would go to like a top tier sushi restaurant or go to the place where they sell like the best Wagyu beef on that island and just enjoy myself. Eat some good food in Yuki fashion. That's, I would do. But I do want to say I will be defending Yuki from here on out. He's really improved so much, and like I just love seeing that growth in him, like just in general, like from his early days in like DTS to like now. It's just like it's been lovely to see like just his growth. Like I'm like, yes, let's go, keep on going. But all in all, at the end of the race, Max wins with Checo and P2 giving a lovely Red Bull 1-2 finish with Carlos in P3.
Yes. And actually, Carlos on the podium at Suzuka means that he has been on the podium for all the races that he has competed in this season. Because remember, he did not compete in Saudi Arabia.
I am like shaking in my boots happy from because I expect nothing less from our Chile driver. It's just chef's kiss, love him. I will wear my Ferrari and Carlos stuff every race weekend for him.
Carlos has just stayed very consistent this race and all the races this season, and he's just really like dominating. I don't know if it's just that he's got something to prove, but that man, if he hasn't already, he has proved it.
Oh, that boy definitely has something to prove. He needs that seat. He needs a seat. But other than that, other than Carlos having a perfect podium record this season, we got the classic Max fastest lap. What else is new? And something that warms my heart is Charles for driver of the day.
I was so proud of Charles for getting driver of the day. Like, very much deserved it. That's all.
But now, can we talk podium celebrations and how P, Kelly Piquet's daughter, who's Max's girlfriend, being excited for Max and like kept yelling, "Yay Max" or "Yay Maxi." I can't remember what exactly she yelled during the podium celebration. It was the cutest thing. And also, she also yelled, "Yay Checo," by the way, which is just cute.
Literally the cutest thing ever. You can just see like in the videos, like Max, like he's just like gleaming with happiness, like seeing like her celebrate that way. And the fact that she was also calling out Checo's name in that same fashion as she was calling out Maxi just to wave hi, literally melted my heart. Checo's literally her uncle now. Like there's no questions. That's Theo Checo now, or whatever it's said. Like Theo is like translated to in Dutch. That's Checo now to her because it was so cute.
I think Max was very thankful that the race went well and that he won. Apparently, he was afraid that if it didn't go well again, P would think that she's bad luck, and he really didn't want that. And I think that's so sweet that that was like one of his concerns. He's like, I need to win this race so P knows that she's not bad luck. Because pobrecita, sweet little girl. And also, I'm pretty sure she was yelling Maxi.
I can just imagine the reaction from like all the Red Bull and like Max fans if like P was like the not so lucky charm. Yeah, wouldn't want that for anyone. But I'm not gonna lie to y'all. I was in bed at the last 10 laps. It was late. It was really late, and at one point I was just like dozing off. So I was just like, yeah, I see that Red Bull 1-2 in a Ferrari in P3. I saw it was Charles at first, and then it ended up being Carlos, and I was just like, a win's a win. Because again, Charles did great from where he started and finishing up in P4, like really did the damn thing. And Carlos, like again, he's showing up and showing out, and I love that for him. The only thing that I do miss is just the chaos that we got for first place from the Australian Grand Prix. So I'm hoping for more of that, but that's just me being selfish for some craziness. But yeah, it was a really tough race to watch overall, just because for us US East Coast time people, it's very late or very early, depending how you look at it. So but still a fun one. I like this track a lot.
Yeah, and now One team we haven't talked about this whole race recap, which is honestly surprising, is Mercedes. I don't know if y'all all watch on F1 TV, but I will say Mercedes was very active on the radio this race and with their issues and concerns. Frankly, Hamilton was just not having it, and you could tell. Like, he was like, this isn't working. I'm not happy. Why are you pitting me if my tires are good? And then lost his place. I mean, it was a shit show. Let's just be honest. But I will say, Russell, you didn't do bad. I will say that.
I do agree with you, Han. I'm just happy that information was about to be leaked about Lewis joining Ferrari next year. No offense to Carlos. I want you in the seat next year too, so don't get me wrong. But I would probably be stressed along with some other LH fans too about how the season's going. But on the side of George, I think that little boy that was screaming his name during the post gave him some good little pixie dust cutest thing.
Honestly, Mercedes at this point, especially Lewis, I feel like he's just too checked out. Like how should I put this? Remember that one radio during the race where he said, "Should I let George by?" That's very unlike him. Like, if you look back at old races, say when Valtteri was his teammate or even Nico was his teammate at Mercedes, he would never have asked that question. And that to me just shows how done with Mercedes, sad to say, he is.
And now that we've covered this past weekend's race, I would love to start talking about predictions for the Shanghai Grand Prix. I'm excited for the Chinese Grand Prix. I really am. I'm aiming for mostly like a realistic prediction this time. Sue me. Max will obviously probably be in P1. It is what it is. I do think that Charles could get P2. I think that he might be wanting to prove something after having some issues this weekend, and I think that China he might be able to. And then for P3, I think George might come back and get onto podium. Hopefully, maybe. But I think that would be a fun shakeup for the podium, and it would actually be really fun to watch those three in the top racing. And this is not a top three, but I also would like to see Zhou in the points just because this is going to be his home race. And I feel like it's only fair that if you get a home race, you get a point, at least one.
No, I agree with you, Chels. I, as a not so new but fairly new F1 fan, I am hyped to see this race because I've never seen a race at this prix in particular. Thank you, COVID. Love you. Be gone, please. So I have some high expectations for a good race just because of the hype around it in general. But I do see Max taking the win. Again, Red Bull, it's a rocket. And it's also Max. Like, again, he knows what he's doing. However, I would like to see both Ferraris on that podium. Maybe I'm just being Delulu, but there's just something about Charles and Carlos both being up there that gives me all the happy feelings. But I do hope that things start to turn around for the other teams in the back of the grid, especially for like Alpine in particular. They've just had such a rough start to the season, and I don't think the French Revolution between the teammates are helping out much. So, yeah.
Oh, it's definitely not helping. And while I do agree that something needs to happen at Alpine, they really need to put that Ryan Reynolds money to good use that they got last year. My dice doesn't seem to agree, but rather he sees P1 K-Mag, P2 Fernando, and P3 Oscar. Well, P1 is honestly just as outlandish as an Alpine podium at this point. Because remember, K-Mag hasn't been on the podium since his very first race, his rookie season. P2. There's hoping that these upgrades work, but I'm not 100% crossing my fingers because After second half of last season, Aston Martin hasn't been doing great. Now, P3. I feel like that's the most realistic podium prediction based on the season so far. And I really hope Oscar gets it.
So I'm gonna kind of be like Chels with my predictions and going for realistic. I think there's no doubt Max will be P1. Next, I would love for Carlos to be P2. But last, I'm at a toss up. And while I love for Lando to be on the podium, I do really think we will see either Checo or Carlos up there. But I do hope Joe gets in the points at his home race, or at least finishes the race in a good standing with no major issues. Yes, Sauber, please, no terrible pit stops. And the Chinese Grand Prix is one of my favorite races of the grid, and I'm super excited to watch it, even though the time is gonna suck.
RIP our sleeping schedules. And to close out the episode, we have a moment of the weekend for you. And of course, it goes to Yuki earning points at his home Grand Prix. Like Ito said, this makes him the first Japanese driver to score points since 2012. And I just hope he keeps on getting those points and more throughout the season.
Thank you for hanging out with us today in the paddock. This was an insane race, I think, in Japan. It was really fun to see how it came out. And honestly, let us know your favorite moment on our socials. Everywhere we are at Paddock Girls Podcast, except Twitter, X, whatever, where you can find us at Paddock Girls Pod. Don't miss us next week. The girls are going to be chatting all things Mick Schumacher, our fave. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.